Hi everyone, welcome back to Demand Decoded. I'm Dan Stilgo, marketing manager at Blend, and joined by Phil Valander, co-founder at Blend today. And this episode has been on the agenda for a while because I think we see so many mistakes and things that marketers continue doing, even though data proves otherwise, theory proves otherwise, and there are a lot of things happening that simply need to stop in B2B marketing. So on today's episode, we're going to outline 5 things that we believe need to stop in B2B marketing right now, today. This podcast is brought to you by Blend. We're a B2B website and demand generation agency. We work with ambitious businesses just like yours to create and execute effective demand generation strategies that drive pipeline for your business. We also recognize that your website is the most important asset you have in marketing. So we specialize in building scalable websites on HubSpot that convert the demand that you've created. If you want to find out more about our services and see real results that we've generated for businesses, visit blendb2b.com. So number 1 on our list is, well, we've got 3 things really bucketed into here, but lead gen, lead nurturing, lead scoring, call it what you want, call it email nurturing, whatever that is. Phil, lead generation, all of the below just has to
you
stop,
can't really do lead nurturing and lead scoring without lead generation, hence they are bucketed together. And they really have had their day. At least that's what all the evidence that is available to me seems to communicate clearly. Now, it's probably true to say that if you're listening to this, then you're probably some of the way there on the lead generation doesn't really work like journey, but your friends need to know. You need to communicate, because there are so many marketers out there who are still on that hamster wheel, working, toiling endlessly to create gated content, to generate leads that they try and score, that they now try and enrich with AI and so on. But it's not going to change fundamentally that when you look at the makeup of the cohorts, the people who buy from you and the people who are your leads, like the leads are not your customers of the future. We've seen it again and again and again in data. We've been fortunate to work with businesses who use HubSpot for many years. And so we've usually had good marketing data at our disposal. And the percentage conversion rate from lead to pipeline to customer just doesn't justify the investment, the effort, the cost. It's not that it's small, but tolerable. It's pathetic. And you can't look at data that tells you the performance of something you're spending a lot of money to do is pathetic and keep doing it, Whereas in nearly all the cases we've ever had the opportunity to look at, the majority of pipeline comes from anywhere but the lead pool. And so the people who buy from you are not your leads. They don't become leads before buying, meaning they're not the people you nurture. They're not the people receiving and clicking the emails if they do. They're not the people that get scored by your lead scoring mechanism. So they're not the people that get falsely flagged as an MQL and pass to sales. And they're not the people that go on to buy from you ultimately. So it's just a massive waste of time and money that is usually pretty clear to see in the data if you look.
Yeah, and even though I think you said quite rightly, the audience listening to this are, I would say, quite well aware of the issues around lead generation and its abysmal ability to convert leads into customers. But I think some value that we can give is that I know for a while I believed in this, but was still stuck on the motion because of organizational changes unable to happen, because you've got pressures from the sales team and the sales org being too large. They need feeding with all these leads. And if you suddenly turn all that off overnight, you've got a huge restructure to happen there, which I believe should still happen. Mm-hmm. But many organizations are, quite rightly cautious to make the change. So the best thing to do really here is look at your own data to prove this thing. I think we've probably said split funnel analysis 50
many
times on this podcast, but absolutely go away, do a split funnel analysis to prove to yourself with your own data, because it will look exactly as we're describing, where all of your lead generated low intent leads will be converting from lead and MQL into opportunity and pipeline at sub 2%. That's being generous. whilst leads from your website, high intent conversions, will be converting at 20% plus in many cases. And even leads from other sources like events, if you're not going to bucket them in low intent, will likely convert better as well. It's like these the lowest of low intent leads from like content syndication, gated content will just be converting absolutely abysmally because they've had no connection with your brand, no connection with your sales team, like no connection with anything to do with you other than consume a piece of content where they've forgotten about your brand anyway, and that just results in awful conversion rates.
Yeah, you've touched on the most important point of all there, which is to separate things by intent, separate low intent from high intent, because that's where the stark difference appears and manifests itself. Some lead generation programs for large enterprises, particularly with big brand name recognition, generate high intent and low intent leads and call them leads. What you'll find, particularly if you're an SME scaling up, fighting for market share, really relying on marketing to bring you your business, what you'll find if you look at low intent versus high intent leads and their performance is that when you cut off those low intent leads, which could change the workload that your sales team, has, you might not be cutting out pipeline and revenue, merely sales rep activity.
Yes.
And that might be no bad thing because their activity can go into either prospecting, which I believe sales does better than marketing at the end of the day. Yeah. It can go into actual real prospecting where they're not trying to manhandle a poor fit, low intent marketing lead into a customer. They're actually reaching somebody who they've identified, could benefit from what they're doing. So it could be real prospecting or just additional time and investment in high intent leads while you get on with creating more of those. And that shift, we've seen and heard and had it reported that shift can be quite rapid. It doesn't take years to be generating more pipeline overall when you adopt a high intent focused approach to lead generation, as it were, shift away from low intent lead generation. And while you might have a team that are sort of dependent on this supply of stuff, it might only be supplying them with activities to complete, might not be producing anything in the way of their core KPI, their quota, your revenue, etc. So data reveals all in this instance, and it can be very, 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 very interesting and telling to look. And it might help you make the case. But you do, like you say, come up against internal resistance, and you've got to bring other people along with you, and that can take time.
Yeah. But at the end of the day, the proof is in the pudding. The proof is in the data. Ultimately, it will show you that these low intent leads are terrible at converting into pipeline and revenue. And I have seen, like, Cognism, I think, said about it. A few other marketers that have made this pivot that I know have quite successfully transitioned the sales model into a more ABM, outbound, sophisticated, outbound approach with intent data layered over the top. And it's really just finding a different purpose for that resource that's freed up that gives you better results.
One that has ROI.
It's all about ROI.
Already or credibly could have if they were focusing their efforts, there. And I think there's a lot to be said for keeping, and we're going to touch on it later, keeping marketing and sales like focused on what they do best and not sort of doubling up on that effort. Like, don't make salespeople try to do a marketing job by talking to high volumes of low intent leads. Keep them focused where they have the most success now, which is talking to high intent leads or prospecting, probably.
Yeah, and what I would do as well, like, because you touched on ROI, is within that split funnel analysis, you can quite easily lay out your budget and then closed one and figure out which sources are your best ROI within that split funnel analysis. And what you'll usually see is that you're spending a huge amount of budget on capturing low intent leads that don't deliver any closed one value, meaning ROI is absolutely abysmal.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, it is all about where do you put your budget and for what gain. And if I was a marketing leader in a client-side organization today, I don't think I'd be able to sleep at night until I had this information. Yeah. It just, I couldn't cope not knowing where budget was turning into revenue and where it wasn't, because you're flying blind. everything you use to measure your performance is meaningless if you don't follow it through to pipeline.
Yeah, one thing you said to me the other day, actually, which, pumped my ego, made me feel quite good, is that when I think about marketing budget, I think about it spending my own cash.
Right, okay.
Because if you put yourself in that mindset, you are like so reluctant to spend any budget on anything really, unless you can be really confident that it delivers ROI. Like, you are not just splurging money left, right, and center, which data will tell you, lead generation is one of those biggest wastes of budget.
Yeah, exactly. That sort of feeling of care that comes very easily to business owners. But it's really beneficial if you think of every piece of investment you're making is well, one, it's real money that you can't get back, and essentially, if you're in business, it's your money. Your company's money, and wanting to spend it wisely should be every marketer's aim, really, and goal. But you can fall into a trap of thinking, well, I've got an allocated pot, it doesn't really matter what I get back, I just got to spend it. So I think that is a good mindset, and it does lead to better results, and I do admire and applaud you for it.
Thank you. All right, well, let's move on from lead gen, because I think
Done.
Lead gen's buried.
Yeah.
It's dead.
Probably rightly number one on our list, but
covered.
Dead and buried.
It's covered. The next one is actually not too far away though, which is PPC, more specifically low intent PPC, because time and time again, we see businesses just wasting huge amounts of budget on low intent PPC, bringing in really unqualified traffic to the website for terms that buyers are never going to use to find a product. They're merely just researching for information, leading to, again, terrible ROI. You've got one of the most expensive channels in terms of PPC, in Google mainly, which is where most of this waste is. And you need to be so strategic with where you put that budget in order to get the best return from investment from it, and wasting it on low intent keywords, broad match keywords that aren't going to bring in buyers that are looking to buy right now is one of the easiest ways to waste budget.
So my experience on the whole, and tell me if you align with this or if there's differences, my experience on the whole is no amount of campaign optimization can, in some cases, most cases, make PPC, Google Ads, an effective, a wholly effective channel for B2B offers. So if you've got a complex product to sell that has either a long sales cycle, a high cost, a large decision-making unit, search ads don't trigger those purchases. They are not the catalyst to becoming top of the shortlist, to be the chosen vendor to provide that service. And so wherever you've got a business that has something complex, industrial, or that requires business change to implement, bidding on, like you said, low intent keywords that are aimed at people who are not right there in the purchase process, you can't optimize that to success. Your only choice is really to cut that spend and reinvest it elsewhere when you look at things like ROI, self-reported attribution, and the platform metrics, which, when you put the right lens on it, do typically back that up, right? They do typically say the performance of this campaign is not positive in terms of, well, probably clicks to your website. Let's face it, these campaigns can generate clicks, but they don't generate clicks like B2C campaigns will generate clicks. But conversions, pipeline, and revenue, so often lacking.
Yeah. And the thing is with PPC, because it is so easily directly attributable to the website, there's no excuse for not knowing the conversion rate that Google PPC or Microsoft ads are giving you back to your website, because the software attribution is there. If you're not using a software attribution tool, you can do this in Google Analytics, actually track conversions through to your website, and it's easy to get this data.
Yeah. So, but wouldn't you even get some false positives from that data if you're not careful? In terms of attribution software can take a piece of closed won revenue and assign influence to things that have had no material impact just based on impressions. And you might see some visits, like software attribution, the basic kind, will tell you how did a visitor get to your website the moment they became known to you. That's not the beginning of the purchase process. That's not the point in time in which they became aware of or trusting of your brand. It's just a reflection of what they clicked on last. You might see some PPC in there, but when you look big picture, it's not the channel that is contributing significantly to your results. And we've seen case studies again and again where budgets get slashed, results stay the same, because PPC only really works and is only really effective for your typical B2B when applied in very specific niche ways, if at all.
Yeah, high intent, almost like is exclusively the only way to use PPC ads effectively. One, because they're so expensive and you need to make sure that you are putting that budget in the best place possible, which is to capture in-market buyers right now. But there's also something to consider around the rest of your marketing and the rest of your spend, because like, as we know in marketing, no channel operates completely independently.
Right.
The things that you do from an event side, from a social ad side, will actually influence Google Ads performance as well. Because if you've had engagement with a brand over the last 6 months and they're kind of in your memory and you've created this kind of connection with them, you remember what they're for, then you go to Google, search for your solution, see that brand in there, you're way more likely to click on that result because they're familiar. You recognize them. So there's like a connected nature of all of this together. But that's a tangent anyway. I think focusing back on the problem here, which is low intent PPC, the issue is that in Google Ads, you can't specifically target a niche audience. You're targeting a keyword. Anybody could be searching for that keyword. So let's say, for some reason, my example is always project management software.
Okay.
If somebody is new to project management and they're searching for project management, that could be anybody. It could be somebody who's just starting their degree in project management. It could be somebody who's, 20 years into the role and just wants to look up some new best practices. PPC, from a low intent side, will just bring anybody to your website that can probably never buy from you and aren't ready to buy from you right now based on their intent. High intent PPC, even though you can't niche down, still brings that certain intent with it that will give you a better ROI. Yeah,
there's even a limit to that, which is to say that these PPC platforms truly are not optimized for B2B, because below a certain volume, you can't, which could really be your best attempt to target some like the right visitor.
Very true, yeah.
You can't even display ads. I mean, how often have we found keywords that we would actually quite like to include in our campaign, and we're just told no,
that's true.
There's not enough search volume, and volume isn't always the solution to B2B growth, right? It's fit. It's ideal customer, not like all customers. So yeah, it's really, the odds are stacked against you in terms of making PPC work for your business. But if you're going to use it, like narrow it right down to those high intent keywords, those campaigns, take a leaf out of the Apple Ads certification, which I recommend everybody takes, which is like focus on your KPI, which is conversions into pipeline, not achieving maximum ad gamification scores, that make you feel good and make a lot of money for the platform, but don't result in your pipeline generation, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. And I think the last thing I would say is just don't be scared to turn it off.
Well, that's probably the best advice.
Just don't, like, in marketing, I think we've spoken about this before, we're so hesitant to turn things off. This is one of those things that I think if you turn a big proportion of PPC ads off, especially on the low intent side, you will see no impact on pipeline and revenue. Like, we've tested it, we've seen it time and time again.
Yeah, that inability, or the feeling of inability to turn it off, is often because people have yet to find the foundations, the stability within what they're doing, and I can sympathise with that. If you listen to the episodes of this podcast, I hope that you'll come away with some ways to build a stable, solid foundation that lets you look at PPC in that sort of impartial, dispassionate way and say, not right now. That's not what we need right now. Turn it off. Maybe come back to it later when things have changed, when our outlook has changed, when the market's changed. But right now, that's not driving a result. Kill it.
Cool. Yeah. Good point to end on, I think. So that's PPC, right? So we've covered lead gen and PPC. Now we're moving into kind of less tactical things, I would say, but huge issues in B2B marketing nonetheless.
Yes.
And we've basically labeled this one bad data.
Bad data.
Because it encompasses so much, right?
Yeah.
Reporting on it, using it to make decisions, all things that come with bad data.
Yes, exactly. And it's essentially saying that marketers tend to obsess over the wrong things, drown in the data they have available, and rarely pick and choose the data that actually can drive the best results or communicate them the most effectively. And as a result, they end up in that situation we just mentioned, which is where they're sort of scrambling, still trying to figure out what works, because everything they're optimizing for is either a vanity metric, a platform metric that doesn't actually correlate to their own result, their pipeline, based on bad advice that hasn't been critically referenced against the true buyer behavior that you see, or you haven't asked buyers what they think or looked at what buyers do. These are all symptoms of a data problem. We actually talked about skills a while back, and we agreed with some industry commentary that was data and understanding, not the ability to get data, not even the ability to look at data, but the ability to understand what data is valuable and how to apply it. That's the real challenge. And so a lot of the mistakes we see are rooted in people looking at the wrong data, optimizing the wrong KPIs, and communicating the wrong data up, I think is probably...
I think you might have missed one there as well, which is not having the good data, not having access to it. Because I've lost count of how many times I've spoken to marketers that lose sight of everything past the website submission.
Yes.
They can't see pipeline. They can't see revenue. They have no idea what they're doing is contributing further down the funnel into more sales metrics around pipeline and revenue. So then marketing start making decisions based on data that doesn't quite give you the full story of how ROI is actually created.
If in marketing you cannot see revenue, where it comes from, what it looks like, who it is, you are unable to optimize for its creation, which means you're most likely optimizing for something else, and there's a high probability, unfortunately, that it's contradictory. It's counterproductive when it comes to revenue. So a gap in the data, the lack of an ability to see past that point is just so harmful, isn't it? It's harmful to careers as well as to results, in my opinion, because I think marketers can become really valuable team players if they are able to optimize for those outcomes. I was chatting about this yesterday with some good contacts of mine down in London, and we were saying that this visibility into the pipeline is ultimately key. And I realised that if I was a CMO or going into a marketing leadership role at a client-side company, I think if I didn't have visibility or access to pipeline data, that would be my first obsession. And my obsession would be to either export data, analyze it, and match it up to my data in a way that let me see what I wanted to see, or absolutely making sure that we built one integration. It was as simple as possible, and it told me exactly what I needed to know about pipeline within my marketing world or marketing within my pipeline world before I try to do anything else, because anything else I try to do could be completely misaligned with what creates results right now.
Yeah, you know what, actually, firstly, that would be a red flag to me, that they can't already see, that marketing can't already see pipeline and revenue data. That would be a huge red flag. I think one of my first questions would be are you prepared to change this within the next month, 3 months tops? If not, that is just red flag central, because you cannot do effective marketing that actually benefits the business without the data to tell you what you're doing is effective.
Yeah, it's it can be challenging. Again, unfortunately, there are organizational, there are ideological, there are political resistances and barriers sometimes, unfortunately, just like with shifting to lead gen, as you mentioned before.
Yeah, for sure.
But it would be something that if I were taking on a role, I'd feel very strongly that needed to be resolved. Now, again, I'm a big believer that anything you plan to automate, you should do it manually first to see whether it's worthwhile.
Yeah.
So don't necessarily spend 10 to 15k on an integration if you haven't first confirmed that the data you need is over there and that if you get it, it will help you. So a spreadsheet can do that job for the first month, maybe the first quarter.
Yeah.
But then go and get that information, connect it up, because that is the North Star for everything else. And it just transforms marketing impact, in my opinion, sometimes overnight. And it creates better results, deeper trust, better opportunities for people, faster growth. It's just, no-brainer.
Yeah. One last thing I'd like to make on this bad data perspective is marketers often reach for data to make every single decision possible out there. But sometimes you don't need data to back up a decision if you're already aware that this is in alignment with your buyer preferences and their behavior and their beliefs. If you have a fundamental understanding of that, you don't need to go and search for heat map data to figure out if people are scrolling to this section or are interacting with this thing on your website. It's like, do you know if your buyers value that? They do. Okay, include it then. You don't need the data all the time to back it up.
Yeah.
The information you have about your buyer is sometimes more valuable than the data you get.
Quite. And in fact, we've seen a sort of trend back towards the most effective, the best marketing, the most effective marketing is to some degree less measurable in the way that we've all become dependent on measurement, right? As in you might not be able to track and measure every single interaction on the way to your pipeline, but you can understand it. You know, you can understand it by one, talking to your buyer, thinking like your buyer, realizing that in many cases you're your buyer, and what you do is not necessarily hugely dissimilar from what your buyer does. All these insights can be better value to you than some data sources, which can lead you in the wrong way entirely. So completely agree. I think that, there is an element of trust needed in marketing, but you de-risk that trust by knowing that you're exploring the right people's behavior and you're optimizing for the right outcomes, and then you can trust your gut to a certain extent. Yeah,
for sure. But ultimately, when it comes to bad data, equip yourself with the right data, know what to do with it, know what you should report on and when you shouldn't report on something, and how to make informed decisions with that data. That covers the entire buying journey.
Yes, absolutely.
All right. Do you want to kick things off with this next one, which I've got down as emulating sales, because I think you made a few interesting points before this on that one.
Yeah, my point here is that I see a lot in communities, online, in discussions. I see marketing teams increasingly starting to act and think and look a lot like sales teams, in essence. And I think this is rooted in the fact that so many marketing teams are frustrated, or rather so many businesses are frustrated with the output from their marketing investments, which, in many cases is a high volume of low intent leads that sales aren't disinterested in. They just can't convert, right? So it's only natural that sales have to rely on their own ability to prospect and generate pipeline via their own methods. It would be madness to get them to continuously labor away at servicing leads that don't convert. So there becomes this, this frustration between the two teams where what marketing's creating isn't valuable to sales, and it isn't because it doesn't convert and close. So sales go their own way. And then, but what I've seen happening is marketing teams looking at the fact that sales are being successful using their prospecting, using LinkedIn, using, people's profiles, going cold, going direct. And they start to emulate that process, but on the marketing side of the fence, which I think is the wrong place to do it. Marketing's job, in my eyes, is to talk many to one in ways that bring buyers who are ready and interested to your sales team. If you are, as a marketing team, purchasing data from people who are anonymous to you, enriching it so that you can penetrate their privacy, without permission, and then you're orchestrating what you're trying to make look like personalized one-to-one communication using cold email, cold LinkedIn messages, automated LinkedIn, campaigns, probably AI SDRs in the future, but on the marketing side of the fence, you're just doing sales' job for them, and that's not your role. And so I think that when marketing fails to produce value for sales, that kind of model, that collapses, and marketing end up trying to implement systems which are essentially doing double duty for sales and will have equally poor results in most cases. Yeah. The conversion rate from these things are not great, which is why sales in itself is such a challenge. A good sales rep still has to do hundreds of activities a day to generate their quota of meetings. They don't do it that way because it's more efficient. They do it that way because it works for them. So I think marketing needs to stop emulating sales when their marketing fails to produce value and look at why they're failing to produce value. And how do you do that? Well, you go back up the list we just talked about, right? You get the right data, you start optimizing for the right things, you can low intent PPC and you can lead generation, and you start focusing on pipeline generation. Then everything that you send to sales has immense value, because one lead from you is the same as 100 activities in their prospecting motion. They love that, right? They absolutely love talking to people who are ready to buy, and it makes their job a whole lot easier. It makes meeting quota a whole lot easier. It makes meeting company targets a whole lot easier. So yeah, I think when marketing starts to look like sales, that's a real sign of problems starting to take root, and a failure of marketing to adapt in a way that creates value for its organization.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, I just sat back then.
That was a bit of a ramble.
I just sat back and enjoyed that. What can I add to that?
Too kind.
What can I add to that? I suppose when you think about marketing, what is the job of marketing? What can marketing do?
I think it's an interesting question. Go on.
The role of marketing is to communicate a value proposition and a message to your market.
Yeah.
And that is often done not at a one-to-one level for most businesses, but done at a market level, an audience level. That is the value that marketing bring to the business, to be able to communicate something, demonstrate something to your entire market at a broad scale, build that connection. And on a one-to-one basis, yes, that's doable, but it's not the value that marketing bring. It's not the job of a marketer to do that.
I agree. And furthermore, if you take all the things that an individual human salesperson does well, and you scale them up near infinitely through automation and AI, that is not going to make them work better. Yeah. That is going to massively tank the conversion rates on all those channels. Marketing can't do sales better than sales, and sales can't do marketing better than marketing. We have our jobs. And the real job, actually, and maybe that's the one that needs to be prioritized, is finding out how to make it all work. And that's the problem with a lot of marketing, unfortunately. It's not generating the value that it needs to do to give people the confidence to carry on the way they are, so they reach. And that's a dangerous time for marketing teams, I think.
Yeah, and actually, I've just been thinking about the role of marketing, and I suppose it's to be known in some ways. Well, in the most simplest form, to be known by a market for a particular thing. And the easiest way to do that is not by hitting up DMs and emails one by one in a mass way. It's to create something better, more valuable, more meaningful than that.
Some would argue and niggle that you can be known without selling anything, and that's therefore bad, and that's therefore not achieving the role of marketing.
You still have to be known to sell something.
You do have to be known. I think I thought the other day that a lot of marketing success comes down to mental availability, right? Like you say, being known requires that you occupy space in someone's mind. Meaning they've probably seen and heard from you multiple times, many times, in a lot of different ways. And that isn't achieved with a single touch outreach, mechanism that just immediately gets the barriers up, right? Pisses them off and gets you blocked. That doesn't create damage. Mental availability. That doesn't get you known for what you do. So, I mean, I think the role of marketing is to make it easier to sell, in my opinion. But you don't do that by copying what sales do. You do that by becoming known for what you do.
Making sales, you can make sales easier by being known, being on that immediate list of suppliers. When a buying trigger occurs, you're there.
Yeah.
Because you're known.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So yeah, marketing need to stop trying to be sales.
I think
focusing on that short-term result versus that long-term mindset and growth ambition.
Yeah, and the journey of buyers sort of at their own cadence through the purchase process, being there as they go through it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Nice.
All right, cool. That's number 4. Last one on the list is relying on software instead of strategy. And this had to be on the list because of the amount of software we're just now inundated by. Software is absolutely everywhere, and software is so often used in place of a strategy.
Yeah. And in place of services,
Yeah.
internal or external, resource to activate, implement,
Enable,
and succeed with said software. Yes, it is interesting how often in conversations people will tell me what software they're planning on using, but not how or why or to what end. It's like, we want Apollo, Sales Navigator, HubSpot, SurveyMonkey, but quite often those names are just cited as the solution. Well, we'll use something for that, as opposed to, well, we want to do this, this, and this, and this for our buyer, and these are the tools we're going to do to use it. So yeah. It's, we see it again and again. CRMs that get bought, implemented, but there's no process of adoption. So people muddle through, use it their own way, make a mess of it. 5 years pass, suddenly the business is looking for a new CRM software.
Yeah.
Whereas if you stop, you take a moment to understand how that software is built, what it expects, what the philosophy is, how you align your processes to it, you get people using it properly, you can have a far better run of luck with that. I think it was HubSpot that pointed out that businesses ought to spend 3 to 5 times on services what they spend on software to make sure they get the most out of it. I think there was a study done, for HubSpot in that area. So probably around core topics like marketing automation or CRM. But I think that kind of rule applies universally, which is, we all know it instinctively. If we buy a piece of software and just put it in our business, it's not going to do anything for us. We have to utilize. Okay, AI might change that to an extent, but we're not there yet. You've got to make it work. You've got to drive it, operate it, optimize it, measure it, use it, and the software alone is not the solution. So, for example, if you want to grow your pipeline, and your first thought is to go to the market and buy a CRM software, an email marketing solution, a data provider, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and you don't hire anybody to operate those things, you don't take consultancy to make the most of them, you don't change your processes, what hope have you got of achieving your aims? So yeah, people need to stop thinking that software is the end of the journey and realize it's the beginning of the journey, and that to go beyond, to achieve what they want to achieve, they've got to work with the right people, they've got to hire the right teams, and they've got to implement, adopt, and leverage their investments in software.
Yeah, and I suppose just change the mindset when it comes to implementing and learning something new, because we can say, let's do ABM, shall we? Oh, okay, let's go and get an ABM tool. Actually, you need to figure out the strategy first, the commercial strategy that goes behind ABM, for example, is not solved by software. Software enables you to do ABM effectively and at scale, but it doesn't set the foundations of why you're doing it, like who your list is, and all of those details that feed the software.
Yeah, absolutely. Software doesn't come before you think about how you're going to execute something and what software you need to do it. In lots of cases, software doesn't even have to come before execution, right? Yeah. A lot of strategies can be implemented, outside of dedicated software.
Yep.
And, I think there's a lot of merit in trying, because by the time you then do go and buy software, you'll know exactly what it is you need and what you're looking for. Whereas we quite often buy software without knowing what our requirements are for it. And therefore we buy a good looking, great sounding, compelling software product with no knowledge of how well it meets our unique requirements. And I've personally encountered that situation more than a few times.
Yeah, I was going to say, how many people do we have come to us, that have bought X, Y, and Z, this software for that, this software for this, and it's like, okay, I've got all of these platforms, I need to do this. And it's like, you don't need that, you don't need that. What you actually need is a strategy to enable all of this.
It can go two ways. It can either go, well, what you need is a strategy in order to figure out what it is you need to do, or in some sad situations, I'm very sorry, this software doesn't do that.
Yeah.
And that's the one I hate the most, because there's always tie-ins and there's always cost, and you don't want to be the one to tell someone that the piece of software they bought is not the right software, but it does happen on occasion. But yeah, knowing what your strategy is and what you're going to do, what you're going to execute, and what that looks like is the best way to buy the right software, ultimately, isn't it? Knowing what you're going to do before you do it.
Yeah. Cool. All right. I think we can wrap it up there.
All right.
We've got
good
5
stuff.
things. Maybe we should do 5 things to start in B2B marketing.
It's probably time.
Yeah, because I always like giving advice on what to do, because it's easy to say what not to do. It's harder to say what to do.
Yes. And I think although everything today has a sort of flip side that we've touched upon, we can definitely go deep on what to do at some point. Agreed.
All right. Well, that's on the backlog, so stay tuned for that. But let's wrap it up there anyway. Hopefully you enjoyed this episode of Demand Decoded. If you did enjoy it, a like, a follow on whatever platform you listen to would be great. And yeah, we'll catch you next time. Bye, everyone.
Thanks all.